Hi, everyone. My name is Corey Shapiro, and I am a JCPA Frank Fellow, and I will be moderating today's webinar on the 2018 election wrap-up and the Jewish community. Thank you all so much for tuning in to today's program. JCPA is the national network of the 125 Jewish community relations councils across America and 16 national Jewish organizations. Our mission is to promote a democratic, just, and pluralistic American society, promote Israel's quest for peace and security, and to stand up for human rights. We convene our network to develop and effectively implement consensus policy on key issues and emerging events in the United States and mobilize our network to ensure engagement on national issues. A large aspect of our work is to ensure strong relationships with civic, faith-based, and minority leaders and legislators locally and nationally, and work to build an America we want to live in. We know that many of you have worked very hard to help get out the vote all over the country during this important election, and you did a great job. People from all over the country, from all different age groups, religions, and diverse populations voted. And many historic gains were made because of all the work you all put into the election. Today, we have a very esteemed panel of speakers with us who will help us make sense of the results of the evening from a Jewish community relations lens and discuss with us what we can expect for the next 2 years. The program will begin with a moderated discussion with the panels and will be followed with questions from you all. If you have questions, please write them in the chat box on your screen. You can begin to write them now or anytime while the speakers are presenting. The questions will be reviewed by JCPA staff and myself, who will help summarize them for the speakers. I would now like to introduce our esteemed panelists. Jane Eisner is the editor-in-chief of The Forward, the first woman to hold the position at America's foremost national Jewish organization. Online and in print, The Forward is the authoritative source of news, opinion, arts, and culture in the Jewish world. Prior to her work with The Forward, Eisner held executive editorial and news positions at the Philadelphia Inquirer for 25 years, including stints as editorial page editor, syndicated columnist, City Hall bureau chief, and foreign correspondence. She is the author of Taking Back the Vote, Getting American Youth Involved in Our Democracy. Eisner is also a graduate of Wesleyan University and the Columbia School of Journalism. We also have with us Stewart Ayen. Stewart Ayen has been a professional journalist for 50 years. He's been a staff writer since 1990 for the New York Jewish Week, the largest Jewish weekly in the United States, where his primary beats are the Middle East, Holocaust restitution, international affairs, and politics. He has also covered virtually every Democratic and Republican national convention since 1988. In 1997, Mr. Ayen received a Pulitzer Prize nomination for a series of stories exposing Swiss ties to the Nazis. It was his third Pulitzer Prize nomination. We also have with us Ron Kampeas. Ron is the Washington bureau chief of the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. Ron came to JTA from the Associated Press, where he has worked for more than a decade in its bureaus in Jerusalem, New York, London, and most recently Washington. He has reported from Northern Ireland, Afghanistan, Bosnia, and West Africa. While living in Israel, he also worked for the Jerusalem Post and several Jewish organizations. So thank you all again for coming to this discussion. And let's just get right started. Ron, the first question is for you. How are we going to assess the impact of the Pittsburgh massacre on the elections, given how close it was to the elections? Do you have a sense of this? And if not, do you know how we might be able to find out in the upcoming weeks or months what impact it had on the elections?
Yeah, I think that the Pittsburgh massacre likely had an effect. I think that the tone that you're here coming out of the White House, you saw the most immediate information that we have on the effect is the J Street poll of Jewish voters that showed 72% of Jewish voters felt that Donald Trump had contributed somewhat to the caustic atmosphere that led to the violence, and not just the Pittsburgh massacre, but the pipe bombs that were sent to Trump opponents before that. So definitely among Jewish voters, you had an effect, and that would have counted, I think, in Florida and in Ohio and in Pennsylvania. And you notice that there were pickups in Pennsylvania and in Florida, so possibly there, in California as well. So I think that that's definitely something that probably a lot of other non-Jewish voters were feeling as well. You saw today after the killings in Thousand Oaks, California, the sheriff there mentioned the Pittsburgh massacre. So it's something that I think is going to be pervasive. You saw that Trump was grappling with how to respond to it yesterday at the press conference, where he was pressed several times on his responsibility, and he bristled when he was asked about it. And he also, when he was talked about anti-Semitism, he sort of gave non sequitur type answers. The first one about having moved the embassy to Jerusalem. The second one about the narrowing the trade gap with China as a way that's going to make everybody happier, and that's going to lead to a decrease in anti-Semitism. He's aware of it. I don't know if he knows how to grapple with it, but it's definitely had a sense. And I think it's not going to go away. It's going to continue to be an issue. You had the Congressional Caucus on Combating Anti-Semitism putting out a statement today saying that that they're very concerned about what happened after Pittsburgh, and that's a bipartisan caucus. And with Democratic leadership and with 6 Jewish Democrats chairing 6 out of the 20 committees in the incoming House of Representatives, I don't think that this is going to go away as an issue.
Stewart or Jane?
I know that people are scared. Jews are scared. I met with a rabbi last week at a UJA event, and she started off by saying that a 12-year-old in her Hebrew school told the class that he is thinking of not telling anyone he's Jewish because he's so frightened. Now, the rabbi tried to calm him down, had a discussion in the class to reassure him, but you can just imagine what it was like for him in his home to be able to go and say that. And the fact is that, as Ron, as you mentioned, that this poll that showed that J Street poll that 72% of the Jews asked said that they thought that Trump was responsible by his words and his deeds responsible in some sense for what happened. And I'm just looking at the polls also that showed the number of Jews who were voting for the Democrats. When you look at 2 years ago, Hillary Clinton got 70%. Then you saw a poll done just about a month ago, and the J Street poll that showed that Jews were voting for the Democrats 74%. 76% said they were voting for Democrats for Congress, and a Pew poll done at the time, the exit polls, showed that Jews were voting 79%. So you've jumped from 70 to 79% in 2 years. And what we're seeing also is that more Democrats are being elected. I've got emails saying every Democrat in Queens was elected. I mean, it was just incredible. Now I got an email today from a group called Israel Aid. It's a non-governmental, apolitical organization that sent out an email saying that even before the shooting, they were getting an increased amount of hate directed at them from extremists, both in the United States and in Europe. And they said that people are saying that Israel Aid is involved in the caravan of Central American migrants making their way up through Mexico with the intention of perhaps coming into the United States. And they say we're facing threats. We've worked in conflict zones and disaster relief efforts, but he said, in terms of potential threats to our organizations like ours, it's new, it's alarming, and we're instructing our teams to be vigilant in the aftermath of the Pittsburgh shootings.
I would just only add one thing to all these excellent points, which is that I don't ever remember a time when a president went to a grieving community and was met by peaceful protests of the sort that we saw in Pittsburgh. And those protests were organized by Jewish activists, and they had a Jewish vernacular. They were singing our songs. They did a Jewish ritual. I think that was really significant.
And they said to them, they held up signs and said, you have to denounce white nationalism before you can come and speak to us. He mentioned nothing, didn't answer it.
Right. So, well, and then when the reporter asked him about that at the press conference yesterday, she was called a racist.
Right. So, Jane, moving on to some other domestic community relations issues, what what do the elections mean for the Jewish community on those issues, such as immigration, separation of church and state, reproductive rights, healthcare, entitlements, and other issues that our field cares about?
Well, I don't pretend to know what's in the heart and mind of every Jewish voter, but I think the fact that the economy continues to be strong, it was very strong in the last 2 years of the Obama presidency and continues to be strong now. And certainly for some people, President Trump has been very good for Israel. And the fact that you still had, as Stewart described, this overwhelming democratic support among Jews, I think tells you that there are a lot of other things that they're worried about, that we are worried about. Certainly immigration. I mean, that's what the Pittsburgh shooting was about. I think that there's continuing concern about reproductive rights. I think there's continuing concern about the power of evangelical Christianity and the way that that is infusing the government. Somebody just sent me some bunch of headlines about Matthew Whitaker, the new acting attorney general, that basically he said all judges should be Christians. That doesn't sit well with Jews, many Jews. And I think particularly probably many of you all who are watching this, who are doing community relations in the field, who have ties to so many different kinds of communities, it's very difficult to support a party and a president, and let's be honest, the party is now the president's, that seems so antithetical to so many of these values.
Stewart or Ron, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that, on some of those issues that are mentioned, you're going to get, it's going to be tougher for Trump for the president to advance some of the issues that particularly concerned him. I think, for instance, on immigration, a lot of what he's done has been by executive order, which of course bypasses Congress. But on the other hand, you're now going to have oversight. You're going to have people saying, okay, you put out this executive order. Some recent examples have been the one that separated families at the border, that put a travel ban. Now we're going to have oversight on that. We're going to examine that. And that's definitely, I think, going to slow him down and possibly slow down some of his initiatives. The same thing goes for separation of church and state. You've seen that in some of the decisions taken by the education department to enhance what they call school choice vouchers for schools. I think you're going to see initiatives against that in Congress, and so the fact that the Democrats control Congress, I think, will, at least in terms of the liberal Jewish community and the issues it cares about, there's going to be some a sigh of relief on that. Also, you're going to see like the efforts to completely roll back Obamacare, the More Affordable Care Act, are going to be stopped, because you're no longer going to be able to, you had the famous thumbs down from John Kane that effectively stopped that a year ago. Now you have a whole body, a whole chamber of Congress that's going to be opposed to any efforts to further roll it back.
Yeah, and I've been talking to some of the people at the different committees. You have 4 Jewish people who will probably be chairing committees. You have Jerry Nadler probably chairing the judiciary, and Elliot Enger will be chairing one of the oversight committees, and they're even looking at this thing, and particularly somebody said the issue of separating the children. Who is responsible for that? What kind of work was done beforehand? What kind of orders were done? There's still something like 220 children who have not been reunited with their parents. That's the latest figure we saw. There were 2,300 separated altogether. So that's something that we think they're going to be looking at. And of course, the whole immigration policies altogether. And then people are telling me they're going to look at the spending, and they're going to have oversight that they haven't had until now. And they've really been, the Republicans have abdicated their responsibility according to the Democrats, and they really want to show some accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So, Stewart, some Jews have expressed concern that with the change in leadership in the House of Representatives, that it will cause a loss of support for Israel. What do you see as the impact of the election on policies toward Israel? both in the House of Representatives and throughout the government?
Well, I don't see that because yes, there were some people elected to the Congress just now, just a handful who have been critical of Israel, and but generally we have the leadership very supportive of Israel, and they want to see it continue to thrive, and American-Israel relations continue to flourish. I just got an email from Nita Lowey saying that she's going to make sure that funding is there and whatnot, and so she's in charge of appropriations, and there are people concerned about now that Democrats are have some kind of oversight because they are in control of the House, that there may be some pushback to the Obama to the Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel. He's been cozying up to the evangelical Christians, and people have said it's been at the expense of the, say, 4 or 5 million liberal and moderate American Jews, and he's been really working with the Republicans. Remember, this all started, I guess, back in 2012 when he was seen as supporting Romney, and people were warning him in case Romney doesn't get in, you can have real problems. Well, that partisan divide has seemed to have really taken hold in the country. We've got the Republicans trying to contend that the Democrats are not pro-Israel. I think we're going to see some pushback now that the Democrats are in control of the House. Also, I think somebody suggested that, in fact, Michael Koplow he's a policy director of the Israel Policy Forum. He just wrote a piece in which he said, look, the Congress, the House is going to be asking investigations. That will be asking for many different things. They're going to be having hearings or whatnot. They're going to so bottle up Trump that he's going to do what a lot of presidents do. They'll go overseas where they don't have that same kind of oversight on what they do overseas, and because he'll feel boxed in, and he'll start paying attention around the globe. He's promised to release his grand plan for a Middle East peace, and I'm sure we're going to see that. I would guess within the next few weeks, and so that ultimate deal will be released. And the fact that the Democrats are in power, they're very supportive of this. That J Street poll showed that American Jews, about 3/4, want to see the American administration involved in the Middle East peace plan. They want to see the progress made there, and so that we'll see that coming out, because Trump can do that without feeling the oversight, and this pushback we saw particularly with respect to Israel. 84% of American Jews, according to the J Street poll, now believe that they can be pro-Israel but also critical of Israel. Excuse me. And we saw when Naftali Bennett came, the diaspora affairs minister, he came to the United States to extend his sorrow and whatnot at the Pittsburgh shooting. He also used the occasion when he appeared before different groups to defend Trump, saying, no, Trump had nothing to do with this. His language was not the cause of this. And people pushed back, Jews pushed back. And I saw one report that a man named Edward Blyer, he's 89 years old, he's former president of Warner Brothers. He said, he actually spoke to him and he confronted him. And he said, some of us are older than you are. And we recall the pre-war period in America when Nazis convened in Madison Square Garden, paraded on 96th Street with brown shirts and swastikas, and the rallying cry of the anti-Semites was America first. So he said to him, my hair stands on end when I hear an American president invoke that line. And as you saw at the press conference yesterday, when they asked the president about his using this, saying that he's a nationalist, and the nationalist is also a code word for anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic code word. He was trying to push back against them as well.
I think that's really important, and I agree that even though there are a few new members of the House of Representatives who seem to be especially critical of Israel, there's such a minority there. We can't forget, though, that the Republicans strengthened their majority in the Senate. And while the House has control over funding and appropriations, the Senate usually is the one that has much more to do with foreign policy. So I think that the Trump approach, I don't think it's a doctrine because I don't think it's that consistent, but I think the Trump approach to the Middle East is not likely to change anytime soon.
I would add, the one thing I would add to that is that the one thing that Democrats are likely to change, as Jane pointed out, they have control of the purse strings in the House. I think they're going to restore some of the funding to the Palestinians that Trump cut, and they're going to make it tighter. They're going to make it harder for him to cut that funding. There's language that you can use to write a bill that makes it harder that requires the State Department to actually spend on an issue. And I don't think that's not something that the Israelis are necessarily going to oppose. They're not going to necessarily see that as negative. They did go along with the Trump administration in backing the cuts, but there was a little bit, I think, of behind the scenes resistance to that. The security establishment sees the stability of the Palestinian Authority as crucial, and they don't want to see it undercut.
Good point.
Good point. Jane, the election seems to show a deepening divide in America between red states and blue states, urban areas and rural areas. A huge majority of American Jews, though, voted Democratic, which still leaves a sizable population that did not. What are your thoughts on what this means for the community relations field and our work building a democratic and pluralistic America?
I think we have really big challenges within our community. I think that there still is a sizable minority of Jews who seem consistently Republican, and they have the political power in Washington right now in terms of the administration. When you think about the powerful members of the Trump family, certain cabinet officials, and of course, the largest donor ever to Republican causes, Sheldon Adelson, who reportedly hung out with Trump on election night, even though he did really badly. His candidates got walloped in his home state of Nevada, but I'm sure that's not going to stop him. And so what I see is this kind of disconnect. You have a majority of American Jews feeling roughly the same way about domestic and Israel politics. A minority in disagreement, okay, that's going to happen, except it's the minority in disagreement that right now has access to at least all the political power in the White House, the Senate, and of course, who knows about the court. And I think that we are going to have to figure out how to talk to each other and listen to each other better, because if not, I think the divides that are occurring in the country are going to feel even stronger within our community. And this is new. I mean, clearly, there have always been Jewish Republicans. In fact, a lot more than there are now. And we disagree on lots and lots of stuff. But particularly in terms of Israel and the role of Jews as a religious minority in this country, I think that there's been much more agreement. And those things have been largely bipartisan, and they are not now. And I guess one more thing I would add is that what we're seeing in our community is what we're also seeing in the country writ large, which is now an alignment between religion and politics. So we're very much seeing the fact that there's a much more preponderance of Orthodox Jews who are aligned with Trump. And certainly the people he has close to him, his son and daughter and son-in-law, his ambassadors, all come from that community. And again, that mirrors what's going on in the larger American landscape, where you're seeing people actually, choosing their politics and then their religion. Still, I think that is cause for concern. I suspect that there are not many synagogues where there is an equal number of Republicans and Democrats anymore.
I think that there are from what I'm hearing, there are splits in the Orthodox community. It's painful in the Orthodox community. Remember that whereas Jews generally tend to vote 70-30 for Democrats in the Orthodox community, it's not flipped around. It's not 70-30 there. It's like 45-55, 50-50 at times. And you're hearing of Shabbat tables where politics are just off the table because it is so painful. And I think that one of the things that's going on in the Orthodox community is that certainly maybe an appreciation to a greater degree than there would be in the non-Orthodox community for Trump's Israel moves, like moving the embassy to Jerusalem, cutting off the Iran deal, but a more acute sensibility than, let's say, in the right-wing non-Jewish community to the anti-Semitism, to the concerns about what went on in Pittsburgh. I don't think that the Orthodox have totally written off the idea that the rhetoric that comes out of the White House is partly responsible for what's going on, what went on in Pittsburgh and elsewhere.
Yeah, I do think that the anti-Semitism cuts across all parties. And what we saw in this election, I don't remember the last time so many candidates actually ran, not just in a primary, but in the general election, who were Holocaust deniers, who were out and out anti-Semites, neo-Nazis. I counted 9, and 5 lost, but the other 4 didn't. So it's just amazing to me.
Ron, all those answers were great and I think very informative. Ron, here in Louisville, Kentucky, our community relations council has put a renewed emphasis on criminal justice reform issues, and so I was wondering if you could give us some of your insight as to whether the issue of criminal justice reform was an issue on how Jews in the Jewish vote at the state and local level anywhere else in the country.
Yeah, certainly it was. There were a whole array of Jewish organizations that were backing ballot initiatives all over the country. Perhaps the most important one related to criminal justice has to do with restoring the right to vote to felons in Florida. Like there's about 1.4 million felons in Florida who were denied the right to vote, and a whole array of the local branches of national Jewish organizations almost took a lead in that case in pressing for the amendment, and it passed by 64% in Florida. 60% majority is required for constitutional amendment, and it passed, which showed the degree to which it had support. Organizations like Join for Justice, the ADL, the Reform Religious Action Committee, the NCJW, they were all on board with this, and so was the JCPA nationally had endorsed it, and so it passed. And there were related provisions. I think it was in Ohio that there was a ballot initiative to reduce penalties for drug use as opposed to drug possession as opposed to drug distribution, to make them a misdemeanor. There were Jewish organizations, including once again the Religious Action Center and the NCJW, were pushing for that, and that precisely has to do with I think the Jewish sensitivity to criminal justice issues arising out of the historic relationship between organizations like the JCPA and the other organizations with African American organizations. They really do. There is a real sensibility within the Jewish community on those issues.
In fact, I believe it was a rabbi in Boca Raton who was one of the first ones to initiate the referendum in Florida.
Also, I want to say that this is, I said liberal Jewish organizations, but this is not a partisan issue. There has been, in Florida, the Koch brothers, or, you had George Soros and Stacey Schusterman giving a lot of money to that, and Seth Klarman from Massachusetts giving a lot of money, but also the Koch brothers giving a lot of money to it. It's just seen as a fairness issue. And what's interesting about Florida is that Florida, of course, was split down the middle again, torturing all of us all of election night this year. But this is going to bring a lot of potentially Democratic voters because it so disproportionately affects minorities, the ban on former felons voting. So that could actually tip the balance towards Democrats in 2020.
Dana or Stewart, any other thoughts on whether criminal justice reform was an issue for Jews around the country?
I would only just add that I think we're going to see more and more attempts to work with different communities on minority rights. The outpouring towards the Jews and the Jewish community in Pittsburgh in the wake of the massacre there was just extraordinary. And so many people I know, myself included, heard from non-Jews and really reaching across and saying, like, we're in this together, we support you. And so I think one of the tests of the organized Jewish community is going to be, okay, are we going to pay it forward? I hate to say it, but there's going to be another anti-Semitic, racist, and anti-Muslim. So there will be some other attack like this. And now the question is, are we going to treat those victims the way our community has been treated and supported and embraced? And certainly because criminal justice reform is so important to so many people, I would hope that there would be those kinds of connections made.
In response to a question about the deepening divide, you all were talking about that divide, and earlier Stewart had referenced a change in party affiliation from 2016 to 2018. Do you see that change in party affiliation continuing, that trend, or do you think it's going to ebb and flow over the next 2 years?
Well, I think, this is the Pew poll, 79%. 8 out of 10 Jews voting Democrat, and as I say, what we're seeing it's changed. It's changed here in New York State. The Assembly was always Democrat. Now the Republicans have control in the Senate. I'm told the third time ever that's happened, and
the Democrats
just don't want to go with the Republicans, and it's really just a backlash against Trump and just that whole tone. It's just remarkable.
Yeah, I think that what was interesting is that you saw a trend in the 2008 election. There was like a level, I think, within the Jewish community of discomfort with Barack Obama in 2008 because of the association with Jeremiah Wright. And you saw a trend in the election of maybe a lessening of Democratic support. All the Republican Jewish anticipation, we're finally going to start bringing people over. And then you saw him pick Sarah Palin, John McCain, that is, and it just went right back up. People went, they voted substantially for Barack Obama. And if you look at the trajectory of Republican politics between 2008 and now, unfortunately, from the John McCain type of perspective, John McCain lost and Sarah Palin won. This is a Sarah Palin presidency, and this is a Sarah Palin Republican Party. And so I think that's why the trends are continuing for Jewish voters to stay with the Democrats, whatever their issues are with Israel policy, etc.
Yes, you see, for example, in the Northeast, where now, there's really no Republican Party left here, and yet the Northeast was the home of all these moderate Republican Jewish officials, Arlen Specter and Abe Ribicoff and people like that. That was a whole aspect of the party. They were economic conservatives, they were social liberals, they were identified as Jews, but working in this other sphere. And that whole kind of philosophy doesn't exist anymore in the Republican Party. If it did, you may well have a lot of Jews who feel aligned to it, but it's not there anymore.
Do you still hear that same push that Orthodox Jews wanted to bring over the other Jews to come join our party and be? I don't hear it as much anymore. Am I right?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that when I compiled lists of every Jewish nominee running, there were some no-hopers in the Northeast. A guy in Manhattan, one guy in the Boston suburbs, one guy in the Houston suburbs, all very liberal areas. There were 3 Jewish candidates, and if you looked at them, they were all pretty much never Trumpers. There was it was this kind of quixotic. None of them came even closer to winning, but there was this quixotic attempt to maybe reclaim that old Jacob Javits moderate Jewish Republican mantle, but it's you know, it shows they're still there. They don't want to be Democrats. They want to run as Republicans. They did run as Republicans, but in areas where the Republican Party didn't really mind that they ran because they weren't going to win.
That's interesting.
We have a question from our viewers. What are the First and Second Amendment implications given the Pittsburgh shooting and the change in the House? Will those debates make the divide even worse? And what do you think will be part of those debates in light of the Pittsburgh massacre?
Until you have a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate, there's not going to be any legislative change. But as far as gun laws go, but yeah, the debates are going to go forward. Every one of we followed Jewish candidates. There are 7 new Jewish Democrats in the House, or probably 7. Mike Levin in California is still counting. Every one of them made reforming gun laws a central plank. It's very important to the Jewish community. It was important because of the high Jewish concentration in Parkland, Florida. The number, I think there were 4 out of the 13 people who were killed there were Jewish, and I think that this is, and now with Pittsburgh, it's still going to be a big Jewish issue. It's going to be an issue for Democrats in Congress. It's going to be an issue especially for Jewish Democrats in Congress, but I don't see any changes for them.
I agree.
Do you see an increase in the Jewish community using raising issues of the Second Amendment and gun control in their communities as one of the issues that will rise to the surface in the next 2 years?
I mean, I think you're seeing a little bit on the ground in terms of debates about how to secure synagogues and other Jewish places. And, I'm sure you guys also get the same emails I do from the group, who represent that small number of Jews who are allied with the NRA. And this whole idea that somehow or another, these things happen because we don't protect ourselves enough. Sadly, there was a guard last night in California at the bar, and it didn't save those lives. So I think that there's a bit of an expression, or certainly a concern among many people about the safety and security of Jewish institutions. But I don't see that as a bigger Second Amendment question. I still think that for the most part, when you look at polling consistently, Jews are very much in favor of gun control, reforming our gun laws. This is one of the areas in which, if only we were like Israel, we would be a lot safer, because the laws in Israel are much tougher than here.
And when I did a story talking about right after the Pittsburgh, and I looked at the issue of should every synagogue have, as the president said, an armed guard? And is that going to make the difference? So I ran around and asked people about it, and I got the same pushback. If there was an armed guard, he'd be the first to be shot. And we saw it last night. He'd be the first to be shot. So what good does it do? So you have to look at other things, and just what is questionable. We can't do like they do it in Europe, where they have local city policemen or 2 who are stationed at every synagogue. And you can't go into the synagogue unless you are a member there, or you're a citizen, you're a visitor. You've got to show a passport. You know how difficult it is to get in. And I'm told that this is just out of the question. In fact, I spoke with somebody who said he's been getting phone calls. One of the major Jewish organizations, he was getting phone calls from overseas. How come you don't have a city policeman at your door? And he said it's just impossible. We have too many Jewish institutions. You can't expect that to happen.
I mean, that said, I got to tell you, in the last couple of years, we've dramatically increased the security at the forward offices. We've had to. That's just a fact of life.
One of our audience members wanted to know if any of you thought that Congressman Deutsch, who has a bipartisan initiative on gun control, if any of you see that there's an increased likelihood that may move in the next Congress.
maybe in the House, I don't know. I just, yeah, I mean, they're going to advance it, but it'll be killed in the Senate. I don't think it's, I just don't see much of a chance for it. I mean, it's interesting. The NRA supposedly is getting more and more starved for cash. I mean, long term, maybe there will be a retreat from some of its positions, but it's still playing out. The lines are still very much divided. You have this horrible, tragic situation in Parkland where you have one father of a teenage girl who was killed, who was advocating for gun control, and another advocating against it. Campaigning for Ron DeSantis, the Republican government, and also looking, at the same time for increased options for school safety. But it's, the problem with that, I think, for a lot of consumers, a lot of voters, is like Jane said, it becomes, or I'm sorry, Stewart was saying, it becomes oppressive. You get Americans and American Jews, I don't think, are willing to tolerate some of the, the seemingly oppressive measures that protect institutions and like Jewish institutions in Europe. What is a synagogue? It's like, it's the place where you just drop in. If you just, if you want to do a Yarzeit, it doesn't have to be your synagogue. You can be in a foreign town. You just look up what the local synagogue is. And this is an American thing. I did a story for AP right after 9/11, where I just walked along the mile, Pennsylvania Avenue, from the White House to Congress. And I just noticed all the barriers and blockades that had gone up after 9/11, but actually a lot of them had gone up after Oklahoma City. And the one place I could enter on that whole mile were churches. I just walked into churches, nobody stopped me, nothing. This is the American way. You don't keep people out of a worship service. And I don't know how we're going to get to a point where we barricade ourselves in just to pray together. I don't see that happening.
And right after it was Vegas, right, where the shooter used a bump stock, and there was even the president, I believe, said, "Oh yes, we have to do something to stop bump stocks." You see it happen? Nothing. No, it's not happening.
Are there any other comments that you all want to make, or any other issues that we haven't discussed yet that you'd all like to close out on our discussion?
Well, I think we're all kind of holding our breaths and seeing if there's going to be some kind of constitutional crisis over the firing of Jeff Sessions and whatever else may come next. Obviously, from a strictly narrow Jewish journalist point of view, we're looking at Rod Rosenstein and seeing that. But I think this could become something much, much more important and damaging. And then also, I just wonder what the Republicans will do between now and when is the new Congress sworn in? January 3rd, is it?
Second, I think it's a Tuesday.
In this lame duck session, I just wonder what dramatic things might happen because certainly they have shown when it comes to Congress that they are willing to break the rules or certainly the norms to get certain things done. So I think from a political standpoint, now that the midterms are over, those are the things that, at least as a journalist, I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that what's interesting is the degree to which Jewish committee chairmen are going to be taking a big role in that, just in terms of our community interest. Also, unfortunately, possibly in terms of being targeted by anti-Semites. Jerry Nadler heads the Judiciary Committee that handles impeachment, although he says he doesn't want to handle impeachment. That handles impeachment. He already says he wants his committee to look into not the Rosenstein firing, the Jeff Sessions firing and why that came about. John Yarmuth runs a budget committee. He wants to look at Trump's tax returns. Elliot Engel heads the Foreign Affairs Committee. He wants to look at Trump's foreign investments. Ted Deutsch heads the Ethics Committee. That has to do more with congressional ethics. Nita Lowey heads appropriations. It's also going to be interesting in terms of Trump's tax returns. There's going to be a whole bunch of avenues for investigating the president. I would say the other interesting political question is Chuck Schumer. What happens to him? He said he predicted that well, he's seen as being responsible for a not, by liberals, by Democrats, he's seen as being responsible for a not aggressive enough countering to Judge Kavanaugh during the confirmation hearings. And his rationale at one point, he said, well, we'll see what Kavanaugh brings them. You know, in other words, they're going to lose the elections. Well, they kind of did. The Republicans lost the elections in the House, but they gained in the Senate. And so what does that mean for Schumer's future? I don't know if Democrats are universally confident in his leadership. He's not seen as the street fighter that Harry Reid was.
Mhm.
I'm watching the hate and the anti-Semitism. The numbers I've seen now in this J Street poll, they've really, 81% said they're concerned about anti-Semitism. 79% said they're concerned about racism. 80% said they're concerned about the anti-immigrant sentiment. And when these Central American migrants approach the border, what's going to happen then? And how's this going to play out? And the Jews are going to be caught up in it. I'm convinced of that. And we see even people who won the election keep blaming George Soros. George Soros is the catchphrase for anti-Jews, right? The anti-Semitism, and George. And the days before, just like 3 or 4 days before the election on Tuesday, we saw these ads and flyers being circulated, messages, implicit or explicit anti-Semitism. One radio ad by the Green Party candidate in Cincinnati area accused anti-American communist Jews like George Soros of fixing the election. A Republican running in the state Senate in Connecticut sent out a mailer showing his opponent grinning and clutching a handful of $100 bills. Now, these same flyers were sent out across the country. It wasn't just, right? I mean, so it's got to be orchestrated, and the robocalls coming from this white nationalist in Idaho didn't target just Florida and Andrew Gillum. He did it against Dianne Feinstein and then in Georgia as well. So the hate out there is, I just think it's ratcheting it up, and we're caught in it.
The only good news is I bet we're not going to hear about the caravan anymore.
I'll be right.
George Soros, complete easy on that one.
Yeah, really. But it worked. It worked.
It did work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Never mind.
On that humorous note, thank you all for your time and your informative commentary and thoughts and responding to our questions. I think everyone speaking for myself at least, I learned a lot here, and I think I hope everyone else that's listening in did as well. So thank you all so much on behalf of JCPA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you. I learned a lot too.